Dr. Leo Vance was a man who believed in the certainty of maps. His life was a grid of logic, schedules, and predictability, where every street had a name and every destination a coordinate. But when a severe new sleep disorder shatters his orderly world, he finds himself waking in strange, dangerous locations with no memory of his journey. The objects he finds in his pockets, a spent bullet casing, a water-damaged key, are not his own. As Leo desperately seeks a rational explanation, he uncovers a terrifying truth. He is not merely sleepwalking. He is the unwilling host for the ghost of a murdered journalist, a disembodied consciousness using Leo's body as its last, desperate tool to expose a conspiracy and deliver a story from beyond the grave. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. Dr. Leo Vance's life was a well-drawn map. As a senior cartographer for the city's urban planning department, his days were measured in longitude and latitude, in the precise, comforting ink lines that turned the chaos of urban sprawl into something logical and contained. His apartment was a testament to this obsession with order. Books were arranged by publication date, coffee mugs hung on evenly spaced hooks, and his schedule for the following day was always laid out before bed. Predictability was his sanctuary. Lately, however, that sanctuary had been breached. A high-pressure project, redrawing the city's entire zoning map ahead of a controversial new development proposal, had frayed his nerves, inviting a crippling insomnia that left him staring at the ceiling for hours, his mind a tangle of unplotted anxieties. He remembered taking his prescribed sleeping pill, the bitter taste on his tongue, and pulling the cool sheet up to his chin. He remembered the familiar weight of his own bed. So the slow, groggy awareness that followed was not one of waking up, but of arriving somewhere without a journey. The first thing he registered was the cold. It wasn't the air-conditioned chill of his bedroom, but a damp, raw cold that seeped through his clothes and settled in his bones. He was sitting upright. His neck ached. He peeled his eyelids open, the world coming into focus with agonizing slowness. A pale, pre-dawn light filtered through the skeletal branches of trees, painting the world in shades of gray and bruised purple. He was on a park bench, the wood slick with dew. His own suit and tie, the clothes he'd laid out for work, felt stiff and alien on his body. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fog in his mind. This wasn't his apartment. This was Franklin Park, a good 5 miles from his home on the other side of the river. His breath hitched. He had no memory of leaving his bed, of dressing, of walking out his front door and crossing the city. The hours between swallowing the pill and waking on this bench were a perfect, terrifying blank. A void. He scrambled to his feet, his hands patting down his pockets in a frantic search for an anchor to reality. His wallet was there, his phone, his keys. The sheer normalcy of their presence was somehow more frightening than if they'd been missing. It implied a level of coherence he didn't feel. It implied he had intended to be here. His mind, a machine built for logic, raced to find a rational explanation. A bizarre, one-time sleepwalking episode, he murmured to himself, the words tasting like a lie. A product of extreme stress, nothing more. He'd read about such things. People did strange things in their sleep. He flagged down a passing taxi, the driver giving him a wary look. The entire ride home was a silent scream of self-reassurance. It was a fluke. It wouldn't happen again. He let himself into his building, the familiar click of the lobby door a small comfort. He rode the elevator up to the 7th floor, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He inserted his key into the lock of his apartment, 7B. It turned. The door swung open. And then he saw it. The deadbolt. It was thrown. He had locked it from the outside when he left. A cold dread, far deeper and more absolute than the morning chill, washed over him. He hadn't just wandered out in a stupor. Some part of him, some unknown, autonomous part, had consciously dressed, left his apartment, and locked the door behind him. He was a stranger in his own life, and the map had just dissolved in his hands. He leaned against the doorframe, the secure, predictable lines of his world bleeding into chaos. He needed to see a doctor immediately. A few nights later, the flimsy barrier of rationalization Leo had built for himself was violently torn down. He woke to the rumbling vibration of an engine and the acrid smell of stale disinfectant. The world wasn't gray and damp this time. It was a jaundiced yellow, lit by the flickering fluorescent tubes of a city bus. A large hand was shaking his shoulder. "End of the line, pal. Everybody out." Leo blinked up at the bus driver, whose wary face was etched with the kind of practiced patience reserved for the city's late-night strays. Disorientation crashed over him again, a sickening wave of déjà vu. He was at the city's southern bus depot, a part of town he only knew from his maps, a place of warehouses and chain-link fences. He had done it again. The hours were gone, swallowed by another black void. He mumbled an apology and stumbled off the bus into the harsh, sodium-orange glow of the depot lights. As he stood on the cracked pavement, fumbling for his phone to call another overpriced taxi, his fingers brushed against something small and metallic in his coat pocket. It was cold, hard, and cylindrical. He pulled it out. Under the sickly light, it gleamed with a dull brassiness. It was a single, spent bullet casing. His blood ran cold. This was different. This wasn't just waking up in a strange place. This was a souvenir, a token from a journey he couldn't remember taking. What had he been doing? Where had he gotten this? The possibilities, each more horrifying than the last, swirled in his mind. He wasn't just sleepwalking. His body was a vehicle and someone else was taking it for a joyride through the city's darkest corners. The next day, he was in the sterile, quiet office of Dr. Anya Sharma, a neurologist with a kind, intelligent face that radiated calm. Leo, feeling anything but calm, recounted the incidents. He told her about the park, the bus, the terrifying blank spaces in his memory. He hesitated for a moment, then placed the spent bullet casing on the polished surface of her desk. Dr. Sharma's professional composure didn't crack, but her eyes tightened with concern. She listened patiently, asked questions about his stress levels, his work, his recent insomnia. "What you're describing, Leo, sounds like a severe form of dissociative fugue," she explained, her voice gentle. "It's a rare condition, a sort of psychological flight from an overwhelming stressor. Your mind, in an attempt to protect itself, is essentially checking out, leaving your body to operate on a kind of autopilot. The wandering, the memory loss, it's all characteristic." She didn't have an explanation for the bullet casing, other than to suggest he might have found it and pocketed it without conscious awareness. She prescribed a mild sedative and scheduled a battery of tests for the following week, including an in-depth sleep study. "For now, Leo," she said, her expression serious, "you need to secure your environment. Put extra locks on your doors that require a key from the inside. Give a spare to a trusted neighbor. We need to keep you safe while we figure this out." Leo followed her instructions, installing a complex new bolt on his door that felt more like something for a prison cell than an apartment. But it didn't matter. The episodes grew more frequent, more specific. The locks were always neatly undone. He woke up one night standing in the profound silence of the city's library's rare book room, the air thick with the scent of aging paper and leather. He was holding a heavy, leather-bound volume titled The Rot Within, A History of Civic Corruption. He had no library card. The room was locked to the public. Another morning found him in a damp, narrow alleyway behind a waterfront fish market. The stench of brine and decay was overwhelming. His hands were scraped raw and smelled of rust and brackish water. In his palm, he was clutching a key. It was old, pitted with corrosion, and attached to a plastic tag that read, Water Street Self-Storage, Unit 137. Leo stared at the key, his terror giving way to a dreadful certainty. He wasn't just wandering aimlessly, a body on autopilot. His other self, this nocturnal stranger wearing his skin, had a purpose. It was goal-oriented. It was gathering things. And Leo was beginning to suspect that these weren't just random souvenirs. They were clues. The night of the sleep study was a surreal exercise in futility. Leo lay in the clinical bed, his head and chest a tangled web of wires and electrodes, feeling like an astronaut about to be launched into a mission he couldn't comprehend. He was convinced he wouldn't be able to sleep, but the sedative and sheer exhaustion pulled him under. When he woke, it was to the gentle beeping of the machines and the comforting sight of the hospital room. For a moment, he felt a surge of relief. He had stayed put. The relief evaporated when he met with Dr. Sharma to review the results. She looked baffled, her professional composure finally showing cracks. "The results are extraordinary, Leo," she said, turning a monitor toward him. It displayed a series of complex graphs. "You didn't sleepwalk. According to this data, you didn't sleep at all after the first 2 hours." "What are you talking about? I was here all night." "Your body was," she clarified, her eyes wide with a kind of scientific awe. "But your brain activity is unlike anything I've ever seen in a fugue state case. Sleepwalkers exhibit delta waves, the patterns of deep sleep. During your episode last night, which lasted for 4 hours and 17 minutes, your brain waves were not just awake, they were focused. The patterns here," she pointed to a section of frenetic rhythmic spikes, "are consistent with someone who was wide awake, alert, and performing a goal-oriented task, a complex one. But your own conscious awareness, the part of your brain that is you, was completely suppressed. It's medically inexplicable. It's like someone else was driving, Leo, and they knew exactly where they were going." The doctor's words echoed in his mind as he stood before the rusted, roll-up door of Unit 137 at Water Street Self-Storage. The key he'd woken up with slid into the lock with a gritty protest and turned. The facility was a seedy, forgotten place, smelling of damp concrete and neglect. With the groan of metal, he heaved the door upward. The locker was almost empty. In the center of the dusty floor sat a single medium-sized cardboard box. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the destination his other self had been seeking. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid. Inside was the life's work of a man he'd never met. It contained meticulously organized files, binders filled with photocopied financial records, USB drives, and dozens of photographs. The pictures showed clandestine meetings in parking garages and shadowy figures exchanging envelopes. There were audio cassettes labeled with dates and names. It was the raw, obsessive research of an investigative journalist. A name appeared over and over on the labels and notes: Elias Thorne. The files detailed a sprawling investigation into Councilman Marcus Thorne, no relation, Leo noted with a grim irony, and a powerful construction firm, Omnicorp. The evidence pointed to a massive conspiracy involving bribery, illegal demolition contracts, and laundered money, all tied to the city's new development project, the same project that was causing Leo so much stress at work. At the very bottom of the box, Leo found a handwritten note on a legal pad. The writing was frantic, barely legible. "They know I'm on to them. The threats are real now. Told Miller, but he's dragging his feet. If I disappear, the proof is in the..." The sentence was cut off. the pen having trailed off the page in a long, desperate slash of ink. A chill that had nothing to do with the damp storage unit crept up Leo's spine. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he typed Elias Thorne into the search bar. The news reports flooded the screen, each one a nail in the coffin of Leo's sanity. Investigative journalist Elias Thorne, dead in a freak accident 3 weeks ago. He'd fallen from the roof of a downtown office building. The police had ruled it a tragic, accidental death, likely a suicide, given his recent erratic behavior, according to anonymous sources. It happened just days before he was set to publish a major expose on civic corruption. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He scrolled through the articles, his eyes scanning the dates. Elias Thorne died on October 12th. Leo had woken up in Franklin Park on the morning of October 14th. With a wave of dawning, absolute terror, Leo realized the truth. His fugue states hadn't just begun randomly. They had begun almost to the hour after Elias Thorne's heart had stopped beating. This wasn't a product of his stress. It was the echo of another man's death. The drive back from the storage locker was a blur. The city lights smeared across Leo's vision, but he wasn't seeing them. He was seeing the face of Elias Thorne from a news photo, a man with intense, determined eyes. He was seeing the unfinished sentence on the notepad. He was seeing the impossible, terrifying truth coalesce in his mind. This wasn't a sleep disorder. It wasn't a fugue state. Dr. Sharma's bafflement, the goal-oriented brainwaves, the souvenirs, it all collect into place, forming a picture so insane it had to be real. He was being possessed. The disembodied consciousness of Elias Thorne, a journalist murdered just before he could break the story of his life, was so potent, so single-minded in its need for justice, that it had latched onto a receptive mind, a mind made vulnerable by stress and insomnia. His mind. Thorne wasn't just a ghost. He was a passenger, a rider using Leo's body as a vehicle to finish his final, desperate investigation. The realization didn't bring peace, only a new, more profound level of fear. His body wasn't his own. He was merely the landlord of a vessel that was being commandeered for a ghost's vengeful errand. Leo's nocturnal activities, guided by the increasingly impatient spirit of Thorne, soon attracted the wrong kind of attention. He woke up one morning with the acrid taste of fear in his mouth and the rough scrape of asphalt on his cheek. He was lying behind a dumpster at a secured Omnicorp construction site, one of the key locations in Thorne's files. A silent alarm had been tripped. Before he could fully process where he was, 2 police cruisers screamed into the lot, pinning him in their floodlights. At the precinct, he found himself sitting across from Detective Miller. He was a man who looked as though he'd been born weary, with cynical eyes that had seen every lie the city had to offer. Leo, disheveled and terrified, tried to explain. I sleepwalk, he stammered, knowing how pathetic it sounded. It's a medical condition, a fugue state. Miller took a long, slow sip of his burnt-smelling coffee, his gaze never leaving Leo's face. A fugue state, he repeated, his voice flat. That's a new one. Let me get this straight. You sleepwalk your way through a locked chain-link fence topped with barbed wire into a high-security construction site owned by the very company a certain dead reporter was investigating. And you do this just a few weeks after said reporter takes a nosedive off a building? He leaned forward, the cynicism in his eyes hardening into sharp suspicion. I also got a report from a library friend about someone accessing the rare book archives after hours. Someone who looked a lot like you. And you just happen to have the dead reporter's research files? Son, you are either the unluckiest sleepwalker in history, or you're a key player in this whole mess. And I'm not a big believer in luck. Leo was released, but he knew he was now on Miller's radar. The ghost in his head was making him a person of interest in a murder investigation. The line between his life and Thorne's began to blur even when he was awake. The bleed-through, as he started to call it, became more frequent. He'd be mapping a quiet suburban street at his desk and suddenly get a flash of one of Thorne's memories. The oily smile of Councilman Thorne at a press conference, the gritty feel of a warehouse floor, the face of an informant whispering in a smoky bar. Once, while making coffee, his own hand betrayed him. He watched, powerless, as it grabbed a pen and scrawled a name on a napkin. Donnie the Weasel Fitz. It was a name from one of Thorne's audio logs. The nights were worse. In his dreams, the fragmented voice of the journalist became clearer, more insistent. It was no longer just a whisper of rage and frustration. It was a command, an urgent plea that echoed in the quiet of his own mind. "Find the ledger," the voice urged, sharp and desperate. "Leo, you have to find the ledger. It's the key to everything." Fighting Thorne was impossible. Leo understood that now. The journalist's will was a tidal force, and Leo's own consciousness was just a swimmer caught in the undertow. Resisting only led to exhaustion and suspicion from the police. There was only one path forward. He had to lean into it. He had to stop being a victim and become a partner, however reluctant. If completing Thorne's mission was the only way to get his life back, then he would see it through. He spread Elias Thorne's research across his living room floor, the space once defined by order and predictability, now a chaotic mosaic of another man's obsession. The photos, the notes, the audio logs, they were Thorne's map, and Leo, a cartographer by trade, would learn to read it. He began consciously piecing together the investigation, using the souvenirs from his fugue states as waypoints. The library book on civic corruption provided historical context. The storage locker key had been the gateway. Now he started cross-referencing Thorne's notes with his own extensive knowledge of the city's layout. He created a new map, not of zoning districts or transit lines, but of conspiracy. He pinned Thorne's photos to a large corkboard, connecting them with red yarn. Councilman Thorne, the CEO of Omnicorp, Donnie the Weasel Fitz. He mapped the locations of their clandestine meetings, the addresses from Thorne's notes, the construction sites. He was following the ghost's trail, and for the first time, he was doing it with his eyes open. Thorne's consciousness, as if sensing this new compliance, began leading Leo's body with even greater purpose. The nightly journeys became more daring. Leo would wake up with new clues, each a breadcrumb leading them further down the rabbit hole. He woke in the men's room of a seedy downtown bar with a matchbook in his pocket. A phone number was scrawled inside. He woke up in the pre-dawn gloom of a post office lobby, clutching a key to a P.O. box. In one terrifying episode, he came to his senses in a darkened alley, the memory of a hand pressing a folded note into his own still fresh. The adrenaline of the near miss still thrumming in his veins. His apathetic existence was over. Thorne was showing him a different side of his own city, a hidden layer of grit and danger that existed just beneath the clean lines of his maps. He was visiting abandoned warehouses, the back offices of powerful people, and shadowy street corners where information was a currency more valuable than cash. He was no longer just Dr. Leo Vance, the cartographer. He was becoming an extension of Elias Thorne, investigative reporter. Meanwhile, Detective Miller's investigation into Councilman Thorne and Omnicorp was hitting a series of frustrating dead ends. Witnesses clammed up, evidence vanished, and every lead seemed to dissolve. But one name kept surfacing with unnerving regularity: Dr. Leo Vance. Security footage from the library, a bartender who remembered a nervous-looking man asking questions about Donnie Fitz, an anonymous tip about a guy snooping around a post office late at night. Every place Miller investigated, it seemed this mild-mannered cartographer had been there first. Convinced that Leo was not a sleepwalker, but a central, if bizarre, player in the conspiracy, Miller put a tail on him. He wanted to see where this fugue state would lead him next. The detective didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in patterns. and the pattern Vance was drawing across the city was leading straight toward the heart of the conspiracy Miller was determined to crack. The clues, when pieced together, pointed to one inescapable conclusion. The phone number on the matchbook led to a disgruntled former bookkeeper for Omnicorp. The P.O. box contained a single key. The note passed in the alley described a location. Every breadcrumb, every nocturnal risk led to the final piece of evidence Elias Thorne had been hunting when he was killed, the ledger. It wasn't a physical book, but a digital file on a heavily encrypted hard drive. According to Thorne's frantic notes and the terrified whispers of the bookkeeper, this ledger was the smoking gun. It detailed every bribe, every illegal payoff, every criminal act linking Councilman Thorne directly to Omnicorp's racketeering. It was the proof that would burn their empire to the ground. There was just one problem. The hard drive was kept in the one place Thorne hadn't been able to breach, a location so secure it was practically a fortress, a state-of-the-art safe in Councilman Thorne's home office. Leo stared at the blueprints of the councilman's residence, which he'd managed to pull from the city archives. This was beyond what a disembodied consciousness could handle. This required planning, finesse, and a level of control that his fugue states did not allow. A single misstep would mean a lengthy prison sentence, or worse, ending up like Elias. He couldn't rely on the ghost to pull off a heist this complex without getting them both caught or killed. For the first time, he had to try and consciously communicate, to form a plan with his passenger. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, his own reflection staring back at him with frightened eyes. "Okay, Elias," he said aloud, the name feeling strange and intimate on his lips. "I know you're in there. I'm with you. I want to finish this, but you can't do this one alone. It's too risky. We need a plan. I know the schematics, the security system. You have the skills." He shuddered, remembering the feeling of his own hands doing things he didn't understand. "We have to do this together." He felt a strange pressure build behind his eyes, a faint buzzing in his ears. It was the closest he'd ever come to a response. That night, he didn't fight the fugue. He didn't take a sedative. He lay down in bed, closed his eyes, and deliberately invited Thorne in, hoping to retain some shred of awareness, some influence over the coming storm. The experience was more terrifying than any complete blackout. He didn't lose consciousness entirely. Instead, he was shoved into the back of his own mind, a powerless observer watching the world through his own eyes. He was a passenger in his own body, and Elias Thorne was firmly in the driver's seat. He watched his own legs swing out of bed with a fluid, athletic grace he didn't possess. He watched his hands steady and sure pack a small bag with tools he wouldn't know how to use. He felt the cold night air on his cheeks as he moved through the city's sleeping streets, not with the aimless drift of a sleepwalker, but with the silent, predatory purpose of a spy. He felt Thorne's cold, grim determination. He felt the spike of adrenaline as his own hands disabled the silent alarm on the councilman's window. He felt the ghost's fear as they slipped through the darkened house, every creak of the floorboards a potential disaster. He was a spectator to his own high-stakes burglary, watching as Thorne's expert, methodical actions took them to the office, to the safe, and to the ledger that held the key to their mutual freedom. The line between them had not just blurred, it had vanished. With a final satisfying click, the safe door swung open. Thorne, using Leo's hands, reached inside and retrieved the small, silver hard drive, the ledger. He held it for a moment, a wave of cold, triumphant satisfaction washing over Leo, a bleed-through of Thorne's own emotions. The mission was complete. But the triumph was short-lived. As Leo's body turned to leave, the office lights flooded the room, blinding him. Standing in the doorway were two large, stony-faced men in dark suits, and behind them, looking both furious and terrified, was Councilman Marcus Thorne. "I don't know who you are or who you're working for," the councilman spat, his voice trembling with rage. "But you just made the last mistake of your life. Give me the drive." It was a trap. They had been waiting. And in that same instant, the sound of screeching tires and slammed car doors echoed from outside the house. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in strobing colors. Detective Miller's surveillance had paid off. The police were here. The climax was a tense three-way standoff. The councilman and his thugs had Leo cornered. The police were amassing outside, shouting through a bullhorn. Leo, the man in the middle, was trapped between the criminals who wanted to kill him and the cops who wanted to arrest him. One of the thugs pulled the gun, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. This was it, the end of the line. They were about to kill him to get the ledger back. In this moment of absolute life-or-death peril, Elias Thorne's consciousness did one final, powerful act. It wasn't to fight. It wasn't to run. It was to do the one thing he had been killed for, the one thing his entire spectral existence had been dedicated to. It was to speak. Thorne completely and utterly took over. The voice that came out of Leo's mouth was not his own. It was cold, clear, and resonated with the undeniable authority of a journalist delivering his final, explosive report. He wasn't speaking to the councilman or his thugs. He was broadcasting his exposé through Leo's mouth loud enough for every police microphone outside to hear. Councilman Marcus Thorne, in collusion with Omnicorp CEO Robert Kenwood, has, for the past 4 years, operated a criminal enterprise responsible for bribery, extortion, and bid rigging on city contracts, including the Western Development Project. This hard drive, the ledger, contains proof of wire transfers totaling over $15 million in illegal payments, including a direct payment to an offshore account to cover up the death of City Inspector James Miller. He went on, laying out the entire conspiracy with dates, names, and account numbers, a torrent of truth that Thorne had died to tell. He was stalling for time, but more importantly, he was ensuring the story would not die with him again. Just as he finished, shouting the final damning detail, the front door of the house splintered inward. The police burst in, weapons raised, shouting commands. And in that instant, with his story finally told, with his purpose served, Thorne's presence in Leo's mind weakened. Leo felt a profound, psychic sigh of release, like a pressure valve being opened after years of being sealed shut. A mission had been completed, a great weight lifted. The ghost, its purpose fulfilled, let go. The strength drained from Leo's legs. As police swarmed the room, securing the councilman and his men, Leo Vance, fully, completely himself, for the first time in weeks, collapsed to the floor, the hard drive clattering from his limp hand. The ensuing media storm and legal fallout were seismic. Leo Vance, the unassuming cartographer, became the star witness in the city's biggest corruption trial in a century. The ledger was irrefutable. Councilman Thorne, the Omnicorp CEO, and a dozen other city officials were indicted. To the police and to the world, Leo told a carefully edited version of the truth. He claimed that Elias Thorne, fearing for his life, had been a confidential informant. He said Thorne had passed him the research and the final clues in the days before his accident, making Leo promise to expose the truth if anything happened to him. Detective Miller, sitting across from Leo once more, listened to the story with his trademark cynical expression. He knew it was too neat, too clean. It didn't explain the impossible break-ins or the uncanny timing. But he had his convictions, his city was being cleaned up, and a dead journalist had received his justice. He chose to believe the official story, even if his gut told him the truth was far stranger. In the weeks that followed, the fugue states stopped. The blackouts, the lost time, the terrifying souvenirs, they all vanished. The quiet in Leo's mind was the most profound relief he had ever known. The insomnia that had plagued him for months ended, and he slept deeply, dreamlessly, securely in his own bed. He worked with Dr. Sharma to process the immense psychological trauma, never telling her the full, impossible story, but allowing her to help him piece his fractured identity back together. The experience had irrevocably changed him. The life he had built, a fortress of predictable maps and schedules, now felt like a cage. The comfort he had once found in knowing exactly where he was and where he was going now seemed inadequate, a pale imitation of living. The world was so much bigger, so much stranger and more complex than his clean ink lines could ever represent. Months later, using the substantial reward money from the city's witness program, Leo quit his job. He sold his meticulously organized apartment and packed a single bag. The final scene of his old life was not an ending, but a new beginning. He was standing on a dusty roadside in a small, unfamiliar country, a place he'd only ever seen as a shape on a globe. He had no itinerary, no hotel reservation, no schedule. He had no map. He took a deep breath. The air filled with the unfamiliar scents of wood smoke and foreign spices. A smile touched his lips, genuine and free. For the first time in his life, being completely, utterly lost felt like coming home. The passenger was gone. He was finally the one driving. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.